Today I'm talking about my racing games collection. I started loving racing when I was a little kid with stock car racing. And the first game that I got on racing was this. In 1973, it came out called Race Away. And it's basically a game on, I don't know, short track stock car racing. You had a spinner, and I think you could substitute a D6 in there for it. And just moving around the track, trying to avoid hazards and making a mandatory pit stop, and whoever wins, wins. But I would play this game by myself for hours. I think it was a four-player game, and I just loved stock car racing. Back in that era, in the area where I live in New England, we had a number of short tracks. One track that I went to not too far from my home was Unity Raceway, and there's one in Wiscasset, also not far from my house. Another one in Oxford, Oxford Plains Speedway, which is more well known. We used to have some of the famous stock car drivers come up, like Bobby Allison and Richard Petty, and those to race at Oxford Plains Speedway. Anyway, when I was a kid, Bobby Allison was my race car hero, and then my local race car hero was a fellow named Stan Meserve. And I'll try to throw some photos up of the era when I was a kid that these fellows were racing. I'm going to just talk a minute about some of the individuals that I've mentioned. One is Stan Meserve. He was a local race driver in New England. He ended up going into car building for NASCAR, but he was an excellent racer in his home tracks. And when I was a kid, I followed him, and this is a picture of one of his cars that I remember back in the day. So it's what got me into stock car racing. And then, of course, on the big scene, you got Bobby Allison was my hero at the time, and so this is an example of the type of car he was driving back when I was a fan of NASCAR. I will add that I'm not a fan anymore. Just like with all professional sports, I hate them now. And it's not because I hate the sport. I just don't like what they've turned into. They've turned into this huge, billion-dollar money-making service industry, and the beauty and the charm of what it originally represented, and I don't care if it's baseball, football, basketball, or NASCAR racing. It's all been kind of ruined, in my opinion. But I still enjoy it by going back into the past. I also come from a family that had a stock car racer in it. In fact, my namesake was a stock car racer, my grandfather. And I'll show some pictures of his interesting times back in around 1950. As I understood it, his father, my great grandfather, was somewhat of what you would call, I guess, a bootlegger. And yes, we had those up in New England back in the day. So I guess my grandfather's early cars had some bullet holes in them. I'll also show a picture here of my grandfather. He's racing here at a very little known speedway in Waterville. It's not there anymore, of course, but in around 1950 is when this race took place. You can see my grandfather's rolling his car over here, and there's a picture of them hauling him out of it. And he was hospitalized in this accident. Lucky to be alive, according to his version of it. But this is where the hot rodding and racing in my blood actually came from, I guess. Here's another game that I got when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, Speed Circuit. And that is an interesting game. It doesn't use dice to move the car. What makes that game interesting to me is it has somewhat of a character creation element, like from role-playing games in it, where you have a set number of points to build your car. And your car has to, it will feature, is it going to have a high top end? Is it going to have a good, acceleration, good braking? and things like that. And you had a set amount of points that you could devote to those features, create a unique car. But you couldn't do everything. If you're going for a high top end, you're probably not going to get good braking, or you're not going to get quick acceleration. So I always defaulted to, I liked a car that handled well. So I liked quick acceleration and deceleration and low top end. But that was just me back in the day. Here's another game that came out much later, Formula D. And I was very interested in getting this game because this one is interesting. You have different sided dice that are used for first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth gear and all that as you're going around the track. So, the dice are still providing some randomness, but you're also having the ability to downshift and pick what gear you're going to go through and plan your corners. It was a lot of fun. I definitely played this game with my grandkids, and they enjoyed it a lot. Maybe we can take a look at a few of these games for a minute. A game that I haven't mentioned yet that I have is called Monza. I've forgotten the name of the company that makes it, but they make a lot of like wooden block type games for kids. And Monza is interesting. You have little wooden race like Formula One cars on a small track that's all color coded, and you have color coded dice. And so you simulate a race, but the interesting thing for little kids is that they can start learning optimization, because you move around the track by playing your dice colors in an order. And so you can look at the track and kind of figure out what the most optimal move would be for you, and arranging your dice in that order to move your car. I don't have that, but I might have a picture of that game. So I'll show that if I do. Here's another game that I have called Raceway 57. This is a very similar type game to the first game I showed you, Raceaway, where you're moving the car around the track. You're not using a spinner in this one. You're using cards that have numbers on them, or an option to play, I'll call it an event on the card. And but it has very cool cars in it. I'll show you a picture at the end of what this racetrack looks like. It's a lot of fun, especially for little kids. My grandkids liked playing this, and I probably have a picture of them playing it somewhere here. I have this race car game called Thunder Alley. This is a more recent game. It's a little bit more complicated than the other games, and it has a card element to it and a way to simulate non-player cars in the race. It's quite a fun game. It is more complicated, but my grandson had the aptitude for it, so we used to play that. And then I got him this game, Grand Prix, which is by the same designer, same type of system, just adapted a little bit to make it more simulating of Grand Prix racing rather than stock car racing. I wanted to add too that there's a game that I don't have anymore that I sold a long time ago, but I enjoyed it when I was a teenager, and it was called USAC Auto Racing. It essentially was a simulation of the Indianapolis 500. It had all 33 cars, and the drivers all had a card deck, which on the back was you rolled dice, but against their own card, which produced results based on their results in the Indy 500 that year. It was very hard to keep track of the laps with that game, because cars would end up lapping each other, and it was hard to keep track of. It was kind of fun though. I did like it back when I was a teenager, but I sold it because it's not anything I would play now. One more game I'll talk about is one that I invented to keep my grandson busy back when we were homeschooling him. And it was a drag racing game. And it's based on the concepts out of miniatures. So I set up a drag strip in the living room, and we used Matchbox cars. And then we would roll a die when the flag, when the lights went green, and that die roll would be, how many inches you could move the car. So we had to use a measuring tape, and like in miniatures, and we would move the cars ahead based on the die roll. Then the second die roll is you're going to second gear, so we're throwing 2 six-sided dice. And then third gear, 3, all the way up until somebody, probably limited at 6 gears, but then you just keep rolling the dice until somebody crossed the finish line first or the farthest over the finish line if you both crossed on the same turn. And I think I threw in an odd colored die in there so that if you rolled like a 1 on it 2 times during a race, you blew your engine. So anyway, it kept him busy, and it was excellent, because we got to use the Matchbox cars. We got to use the measuring tape. We got to use the dice and the adding, learning how to add, 6 dice together. So it was a fun game for little kids. I don't have any pictures of that, I'm sorry to say, but it would have been fun if I had some video footage of us playing drag racing in my living room. I have one more game that I didn't mention earlier. I couldn't find it, so I can't show it to you. It's called Formula Motor Racing by GMT. And it's a card game, basically, that you can play with a number of players, and you use cars lined up in the order that you have when you're racing. And you play the cards to move ahead of people and push other cars back. So you're just constantly rearranging the ordering of the cars. So I don't have a picture of that, but I got some little miniature cars that I use. I probably can find a picture of that. I made my own little pavement piece to hold the 6 cars on there, and made it a little bit more fun. Again, the grandkids loved playing that game, so I definitely I'm glad I bought it. I don't know where it is at this point, so I can't really show it to you. So there you have it. That is all of the racing games that I can think of that I have. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video, and have a great day.